I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust that I could do it on my own. I didn't trust that I could leave, that marriage and be successful on my own. I think that's probably what I was really fearful of, becoming impoverished and not being able to provide for my kids.
Hello and welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. We're here to help you navigate life while disrupting the status quo. Our discussions cover a number of topics relevant to everyday life. We discuss everything from relationships to entrepreneurship. We also engage in some difficult but important conversations. And now, here are your hosts, Brian and Tanya Hamilton.
Welcome to episode 6 of the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. Today we're discussing overcoming intimate partner abuse, and we're joined by Sarah-Marie Baumgartner. Sarah-Marie, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Well, I want to start off by actually just giving you an opportunity to share your story and kind of talk about the experiences that you had, and then we'll just kind of build on that throughout the conversation.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a survivor of the term that most people know is domestic violence. But a newer term that's coming out that I'm really trying to use is intimate partner violence and also intimate partner abuse. I think the violence, while like emotional, financial, psychological abuse is categorized as violence, I think it's hard for people to sometimes kind of wrap their mind around like, well, how is that violence? Because you're not being physically hurt. Whenever we hear the word violence, we automatically go to physical stuff. And I think because of that, we dismiss all the other abuse that you can actually experience. So I'm trying to change my language a little bit to kind of match what is starting to change on an international level is intimate partner violence and intimate partner abuse. So I was in a 16-year relationship. I met my ex-husband when I was 19, coming out of a pretty rough year for me. My father had passed away when I was 18. And then just kind of a whole background of childhood stuff. We talked about those childhood adverse events that happen. And so I have quite a few of those. I was sexually assaulted when I was 4. My parents divorced. My dad, was having cancer. So he passed away from cancer when I was 18. So just a lot going on when I was younger, a lot going on with my mom. She had her own issues of mental health issues. So met my ex-husband, when I was 19. And, I was kind of afraid of him right from the start. There was definitely those red flags there. He had a previous ex-girlfriend that was kind of like, she's the crazy one. And, she showed up a couple of times, like at his friend's apartment with her mom. And so it did look like this like crazy situation. But, looking back on that, those were definitely some red flags of probably the emotional and psychological abuse that he was already using on her to create what's called trauma bonding. So it happens a lot with victims of abuse, and then also POWs, that kind of thing, Stockholm syndrome. So it's creating this dependency on the person that's abusing you and furthering that victimization. So and my mom didn't want me to be with him. There was a day where she messaged me through the computer because she stayed in Texas and I was back in Ohio. And he was like, no, sorry, you can't talk to her. And my mom was like immediately like, you need to, get rid of him. Like you need to not be dating him. And I think at the time, we make excuses. And at the time, it was very much for me in my life. At that time, it was the MTV culture, right? And I was just kind of like, no, Mom, that's like just how our generation talks to each other and it's okay. And so just real dismissive of it because I think it's hard to be mindful in that moment. There's a part of you that knows like this is not okay. And it doesn't feel good and it's not okay. But then there's the flip side of the coin where there is, MTV culture and there is societal culture. And there is well, he's not hitting you, so it's not abuse. And that is thankfully, changing this many years later, where it's becoming a lot more aware of the mental and financial, emotional, sexual abuse that can actually occur in relationships. That is violence. I'm listening to a book right now. It's by Evan Stark. It's called Coercive Control. And in that book, he really talks about how intimate partner violence isn't necessarily like it's more of like a civil liberties violation, really. You're being kept from your finances. In my case, my ex-husband wouldn't let me finish further my education. He oppressed me to where he really didn't want me working as a nurse. He didn't want me making money. And so he refused to support me in any way to further on getting my education. So I got my associate's degree before we were married. My dad was a veteran from the Air Force. And so when he passed away, I actually got veteran benefits to be able to do my education. So that's how I got my associate's degree prior to us getting married. But once we were married, that, oppression started. But then there was also, you're so smart, you could be a doctor. That's what he would tell me. And then on the flip side of that, it was anytime I try to make a decision about our kids, you're so stupid. I can't believe you would believe the dentist that the kids need fluoride for their teeth. But at the same time, he's brushing his teeth with fluoride toothpaste. So it sounds trite that it's toothpaste, and that was more towards the end of our relationship. But those are just the little things that they add up over time. And those are the mind games that get played with you, that it's okay, well, that's not okay for our children, but it's okay for you to use. There's a disconnect in that experience. So that's me in a nutshell.
And now to the present day, you are remarried and you have a blended family. I guess from your ex-husband to now, how much time has there been in between?
Yeah, so I really made a commitment to myself, and I should back up a little bit. I was really fortunate in that I was able to start counseling prior to me leaving my ex-husband. And I really think that is really what contributed to me being successful, being able to leave, because I was able to kind of start building a little bit of a support system and start breaking those trauma bonds prior to leaving, so that when I did leave, I had already kind of started to detach emotionally, so that the decisions that I needed to make, I didn't necessarily feel bad about it. So I ended up with sole custody right away. I knew that was the best thing for my kids. The court agreed, but he would message me stuff trying to make me feel guilty about it. But I think because I was in a place already where I was kind of no, this is the best thing for our kids. So I was really fortunate in that, and it worked to my advantage. I think I found ways to use kind of his twisted ideology to my advantage. So the reason he was okay with me going to counseling was because that just supported how he wasn't abusing me. And so my counselors were take it, it's a gift, that you're even able to do this. So let's get some work done and help get you out of your situation. On average, it takes somebody 7 times to leave an abusive relationship. For myself, I called the police twice, and then on the third altercation, I was gone and I was out of there. And so it really is a process. So during that time of counseling that year prior to me leaving, really worked on a lot of stuff, deep stuff, a lot of childhood stuff. I did EMDR therapy. And so once everything was out, once I was out of that relationship, so I moved out of the house in April of 2016. Our divorce was final in November of 2016. And so I made a commitment to myself that I was going to wait at least a year before I even entertained the idea of dating anyone. So that was this is a year for me. This is the year of me. And really just concentrating and focusing on rebuilding the relationship with my kids, because that was suffering. One, because of the abuse that I was suffering. So that a lot of depression and just the stress and just not being able to have those relationships with my kids that like I really wanted. So that was the other thing. It was having relationship with myself and then having relationship with my kids and really focusing on that. So it wasn't until about 2.5 years later, actually, that I met my husband. And so we met online on a dating app. It's kind of the thing to do these days, especially when you're a working adult. But yeah, we met, and it was it was the first time I'd ever really experienced like love at first sight. So we both like just like crazy weird food, or just not necessarily weird, but just something that's not like the mainstream, burgers and fries. So our first date was actually at an Ethiopian restaurant here in Colorado Springs. And so he was dressed all nice. He had flowers. I was like, cause I had gone on a couple of dates already, and this was the first one that showed up with flowers. But he was so respectful and just so polite. And he still is to this day. He didn't change at all. So, but yeah, so that was 2018 that we met, and then we got married in 2019.
So can we go back to 2016 with your kids? I'm just thinking, I spent over 12 years working in social work, domestic violence shelters, at Children's Aid Society, and then also facilitating groups for abusive men. So it was really interesting to see all the different sides. But the one thing I heard from every lady I worked with was, what about the kids? Right. And, most of the situations, it wasn't the intimate partner violence. It was the abuse, the psychological, financial, sexual, emotional, that type of stuff, which many of them said was worse than, maybe getting hit. Right. Because that's the stuff that stays in your mind. Now, pretty much all of them who had kids said, what about my kids? What's going to happen to them? So what would you say in that situation?
Yeah. So going back to the kids. So there's a lot of layers to my story. So he would tell me that no one's going to believe you. No one's going to believe that, I'm abusing you. And I kind of tapped into that. Well, he thinks I'm smart enough to be a doctor. Let's kind of see, how much, how smart I am here. So I researched, and in the state of Colorado, you can record someone and you don't have to let them know. It's only like only one party has to know. And so and for anybody listening, I mean, this is very, very risky because it did, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, because it did end up in me getting assaulted as well, trying to do this. But the first few times that I did this, was able to record the abuse that was going on. And so when we showed up for that preliminary hearing for divorce court, we played the recordings, and my ex-husband just kind of kept digging himself a hole, like, that's not me on those recordings. And like, he has a very distinct voice, so you could really tell like it was him. And then he would admit that it was him, but then he would retract and say like all of this other stuff. And so like two validating things kind of came out of that court hearing. One, the judge like looked at him and said, I'm no mental health professional, but there's something seriously wrong with you. So that was kind of validating, because for the whole 16 years, I thought everything was wrong with me, and he was the cream of the crop. I mean, he's very successful in business. And then the second thing that happened was he got court-ordered visitation with the kids. And so we had to go down to the courthouse every Friday, and they would go and do their supervised visits with him. Well, he ended up violating like some of the rules. He showed up late a couple of times, and they said, hey, if you keep showing up late, like, we're going to have to dismiss you from the program. And he went off on the people, started cursing at them. I mean, these are the court appointed workers. So he really just like dug his hole. And it was kind of like, once the behavior was brought to the light, he is who he is. And so it was seen. And thankfully, a lot of the professionals that were there saw it. So he ended up getting kicked out that night. The kids couldn't see him that night, and they're in the car crying, like, why can't we see daddy? And one of the things I really, really was sure to try to maintain was not bad mouthing him. I knew that in time, the kids were going to come to a maturity level where they were going to see and recognize his own behavior. So I really just kind of took the higher road, I guess, so to speak, that I was there to support them like in any way that I could. So it ended up being, it was actually the night of one of the Olympics. I can't remember which one. It was 2018. So whichever Olympics that was. And so the Taekwondo center that I had actually started training with was downtown. There was a big downtown celebration. And I was like, come on, kids. Like we just walked a couple blocks and we went and saw our new Taekwondo family down there to support them. So with the kids, I mean, it's finding them support. I made sure that they were in counseling right away. Found them like a fabulous counselor, and then just supporting them and not, I knew, and I'm starting to see it now. Like my son kind of doesn't want to go over to my ex's house a lot. He's also like a 13-year-old. So he wants to hang out with his friends, and that's kind of becoming more important than hanging out with his dad. But I really just tried to let them kind of see the behavior for themselves, and then always be there as kind of a sounding board for them. So if something was bothering them, and just picking up on that and saying, hey, what's going on? What's bothering you? And being there to talk with them. But there was another instance. So then in December of 2016, and that's what I'm talking about, that assault that happened, I was actually taking my middle daughter to her counseling appointment. And that day, she had that appointment, and I asked my ex if he would take her, and he was kind of giving me the runaround, and no, she doesn't need it. I'm not going to take her to counseling. I don't support it, whatever. And because I had already had the decision that I had sole decision making and pretty much sole custody, I said, well, I'm sorry, then I'm going to have to, the visitation today, because it was additional visitation time. I said, the visitation today can't happen. Then I really need to take her to this appointment. That's important. So it was just me and her. We get to the parking lot at the counseling office, and I saw in the corner of my eye, I saw him like getting out. And so I knew immediately like he was there in the parking lot. And so I'm trying to get her out like as fast as I can, but he kind of runs over. And, she starts saying like, wait, why is daddy here? Like, I thought you told me that we couldn't see daddy today. And he's like, no, that's a lie. Your mom is lying to you. So he started doing kind of a lot of the stuff that he was doing already at exchanges. He was doing a lot of that. Anytime we exchanged the kids, he was yelling across the parking lot how I was a liar and things like that, like in front of the kids. And so I turned on my phone to start recording, but I didn't have, I couldn't like slip it away. So he saw that it was on. So he bear hugs me, grabs me from behind, and kind of pushes me head first into the van, into my daughter, because I had the door open, and kind of split second, didn't really think about it. I just did like a rear elbow and got my stance so that I got my, got my balance, and dropped down and turned around and just, shoved him. And then at that point, it was just screaming and yelling. For me, it was not as, I think, traumatic for me as it was for my daughter. She definitely suffers from a lot of anxiety from that. But some of the things that happened. So I have my thyroid scar. So I'd actually just had my thyroid removed 3 weeks prior to this happening, and finding out that it was cancer. And so then, 3 weeks later, I'm screaming at the top of my lungs. So I ended up with like a huge hematoma, because just all those vessels in there started kind of bursting, and I lost my voice for a few months there. So, but the DA ended up dropping it. They said, all they're going to hear is that he grabbed you from behind and then he let you go. Like, that's all a jury's going to hear. But they give the victims a chance to come down and make like a statement. And so I just was like, I'm not passing up this opportunity, because, my daughter started having nightmares, didn't want to go into the gas stations because she was afraid that men were going to attack her or kidnap her, or just all kinds of things. And so I went down there and got in front of the judge and everybody else that was in that courtroom that day, and said, I understand, that it's being dropped. I get it. I get why they're doing it, but I'm given the opportunity to be down here and speak today, and that's what I'm going to do. And I'm here because even though he's not going to face any consequences now because this case is being dropped, my daughter, who is now having nightmares and suffering at home, is going to be suffering for years to come. And she is the consequences of these actions. And the judge looked at the DA a couple of times and was like, "Are you sure you don't want to go through with this case?" I think he was probably a little surprised that a victim came in and just very clearly gave a statement to what was going on. And I really credit that to my training as a nurse and being able to go in and really clearly and distinctly say, like, this is what's going on. So yeah, for my kids, it was counseling, lots of counseling. We're still doing counseling today and just being there to be that support for them.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And the other thing too, just, knowing your story a little bit, you kind of became like the character Slim in Enough. You started doing the training and, you got involved with martial arts. Can you tell us a bit about that as well?
Yeah, sure. So I'm just competitive by nature. I played competitive soccer growing up, and I always wanted to do martial arts, but soccer was kind of my thing growing up. And so once I had left the marriage and was out in my own apartment, you try to find like creative things to do with your kids. And so the YMCA that day was holding like a health fair. And so it was just all these different companies and stuff were there with tables, and you got like a little card and you got to go through and they stamped it and the kids got a gift or, whatever. And it's great because it's free and you don't have a lot of money right now because you just left an abusive relationship. And so one of the tables that was there was the Taekwondo here in town, and I met Weston, who is amazing. He doesn't work there anymore, but I am still friends with him. He's an awesome guy. And so I said to myself, you know what, like kids, like let's sign up for this. I kind of already knew like martial arts is all about respect, right? And I just experienced 16 years of not being respected. So I was kind of, I think, a little bit curious of like, okay, well, what exactly is this respect and how does that look? And it's also something physical, that we can do. So we signed up, and the kids don't train anymore. They got a little kind of burnout on it, but I'm testing for my black belt in May. So in just a couple months, I'm finally getting my black belt. Yep. But just, it wasn't just training the Taekwondo. So the particular center that I train at, they were really good about bringing in like an additional self-defense that's kind of military based and real world self-defense. And so that's actually what I ended up using the day that my ex assaulted me. So doing a rear elbow is not a Taekwondo move. That's that's all kind of a street fighting self-defense move. So I love it and got involved in doing that. And then last year, towards kind of the middle of last year, finally decided to start working in advocacy for other victims and survivors. So now I'm the volunteer outreach coordinator for Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence. And once I got into that role and really being able to work with victims and survivors and hearing their stories and hearing the things that they were going through, I just kind of realized that a lot of the self-defense, like it's great stuff, but it doesn't address the specifics of victims and survivors of domestic violence. So I'm in the process of creating a self-defense program that is more geared towards victims and survivors of domestic violence. So it's probably a lot more mental health heavy than it is on the physical stuff. But even in mainstream self-defense, they'll tell you it's 20% physical, 80% mental. So it's all about that mentality and the willingness and the desire to protect yourself and to survive.
Okay. So I think back to the times when I was working with my clients, and, so many of them would minimize their situation. He's not hitting me. He's just calling me names, or he's just controlling where I go, right? Now that you're working with ladies in this situation, I'm sure you hear that. What do you share with them when they say things like that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a balance, because you can't just come right out and be like, hello, like
For
that's
sure.
abuse. It's kind of helping them along that journey to make those discoveries for themselves and to see that for themselves. And so in those kind of cases, I would go more on kind of like the dialogue that we've had. So you're asking me more of like a point blank question, but I would go on a lot of the dialogue that we've already had. And I think just pose questions back, right? So, well, all he does is just call me names, and it's kind of like, well, how does that make you feel? And it's helping them come to the realization of like how it's making them feel and how it's really like affecting them, and understanding that really it's their personhood that is being oppressed. And even though it's not a physical violence, and I guess you could bust out like Maslow's like hierarchy of needs, like you're never going to reach this self actualization if you're not meeting each of those steps. And one of those steps is like that socialization. We're human beings, we're social creatures. If you're being controlled and not being allowed to go out and experience that or have a hobby or interact with other people, your needs are being oppressed. And if your needs are oppressed, you're never going to reach your full potential. That's from the Taekwondo Center, Master Your Full Potential.
There you go.
I think that was probably one of the other reasons that drew me to it, because that's kind of the saying there is master your full potential. And for so long, I knew it. I knew that I wasn't reaching my full potential, and I wanted to.
Awesome. Now, in terms of, I guess, kind of getting past that abusive situation, just, really want to show people that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Obviously, you've remarried, you've blended your families. Could you share some of that experience? Because I know obviously, it was a welcome change to what you had been through, but there's going to be challenges with any relationship.
Yeah. With the blending part, the challenges. Gosh, some of the challenges that we had, I think like dinner was a big one. So my husband is very much like the whole family sits down and eats, whatever. And, for the longest time, it was like me and my kids were just like, yeah, we just grab some food, go sit on the couch and watch TV and just kind of mingle. So that was definitely like kind of a tougher one, because, we were really ingrained in our ways, and he was, him and his kids were ingrained in their ways, but we sit down together as a family now, every night and eat. And I saw the value in it too. So it wasn't anything that like I didn't see the value in. Even like when I was in counseling that year prior to me leaving, even the counselors were kind of like encouraging, like sitting together as a family, and you talk about your day, and that's how you make connection and relationship with your family. So now, yeah, we do that. And our dinners are very lively and rambunctious. But it's fun. It's fun. So I think that was, it sounds odd because it's just dinner, but I mean, it really is it was kind of a big deal. So, and then I think another difficulty that we had was like just balancing school and balancing all the kids' school schedules and stuff like that. His kids were going to a different school that was all the way on the other side of town. And then when we decided to get married and move in together, I was transporting. So I was still living like 20 minutes away, but wanted the kids to be like in the school district that we were moving to. So we were just kind of driving all over the place doing that. But, so we did, there's a book called Saving Your Second Marriage Before It Starts. And so we did that before we got married. And, we really align on a lot of our values and kind of how we see marriage and how we see our roles. Like him washing the dishes is not like his role all the time. Like I chip in, I do it too. So it's really just kind of, if there's a job that needs to be done, it's no specific person's job. It's just whoever can get to it and do it that day. So I think we really like worked on figuring out the balance. So that would be another thing that I would recommend, like anybody getting into like a second marriage or anything like that. Definitely, that book asked kind of those tough questions that you don't really necessarily think about. And really, a lot of the conflicts I think that happen in marriage in the first place are all value based, right? You have values based on your upbringing and they have values based on their upbringing. And it's like, where do they match? Where do they, so that you can become aware of, okay, like we agree on this, but we don't agree on this. So how are we going to handle when we don't agree on this? What are we going to do about it? And it's kind of going in with that plan ahead of time on how you're going to handle that stuff. So
I like that. So now that we're talking about I guess, your current situation, we all have a story. Everybody has gone through different things, and you were out of the abusive relationship in 2016. You met him. For somebody who is at that stage, maybe of looking into meeting somebody else, building trust, how do you now look, even your views on relationships is going to be different, right? So how do you build trust and healthy relationships?
yeah, that was definitely a tough one because he's actually a survivor himself of a marriage that was pretty rough. And so his ex-wife would kind of toss some stuff out there that for me was really, really difficult. I had to really like, oh my gosh, am I really making like a good decision here? But one of the things that I learned through counseling is believe behavior, not words. And so I really like had to take a step back and look and say, what is his behavior? What does his behavior show me? That is it different than what his words are telling me? So you can really like somebody can lay on the charm like super thick, right? But if their behavior isn't matching up with that, those are definitely like some red flags there and some cues there. And so for me, just looking and I was like, no, his behavior is matching his words. And things kind of like progressed there, and there's a lot more with his ex-wife kind of came to light, and he actually has full custody now of his kids. But that definitely that was a trial by fire for me. That was tough. There was some days where I was just like, am I making a mistake, again? And I really had to take some steps back. So yeah, that would be the one of the bigger ones I would say is believe behavior over words. But then it's tough because you hear some situations where, the other person is like perfect. And then when you get married, it's like a light, switch flips. And so it's hard to trust, hard to trust again. So I would definitely say identifying your values. So it's sitting down, making sure that you really know, like, what are your values? What are your values around money and spending? What are your values around, how the kids are raised? What kind of rules and things do you want involved in that? What are your values around like your personal time? Like what's important to you? Like, is it important to you that you have a hobby and be able to go and do things? Is that something that you're willing to compromise on or not compromise on? So I think it's really like identifying your values first. And then once you identify your values, then you can start building your boundaries around your values. And so then it's working on good boundary building and being able to, when you feel like one of those values is in jeopardy, being able to say, hey, hold on a second here. That's not, what I want to do. And that's not how I want to live. And so we need to maybe talk about that. And if there's compromise or not compromise, and whether you continue on in the relationship or not.
Just for anybody who is thinking, who's maybe in the situation that you were in before. So I want you to kind of, if you're okay with this, if you can go back to being a mom of three in an abusive relationship, if you could go back now knowing what you know and share some advice with, Sarah-Marie at that stage, what would you tell her?
It's tough because like on one hand, I would say like, don't even marry him in the first place. But then on the second hand, I know that I wouldn't have my three wonderful children if I had never married him. So that's kind of a tough one because honestly, I mean, that would be the ideal, is to not get in the relationship in the first place. But now that, I've gone through it, my life is what it is. And so, but I think advice, to give is really the message that I try to really convey is that there is hope. I think there's days where it gets really hopeless and it gets really dark. And especially when you're isolated, like part of abuse is isolation from the outside sources that can help ground you and help support you. But yeah, my message would just be hope. And that's what I really clung to. And I really just grasped onto that. My faith was really important to me. And that's really a lot of what saw me through too. There would be, before court cases, I would sit there in the hallway outside the courtroom and just pray and just, it's some of it's in my hands, some of it I can control, but a lot of it I can't control, and you just have to kind of go along for the ride, as much as hard as that is. But it's the legal system is its whole beast, the legal system there, and there's a lot that victims just don't have control over what happens in the legal system. And so I think the advice that I would give myself, I think, to trust myself sooner. I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust that I could do it on my own. I didn't trust that I could leave, that marriage and be successful on my own. I think that's probably what I was really fearful of, becoming impoverished and not being able to provide for my kids. And because he made so much money, he would get the kids and get them taken away from me because I wouldn't be able to provide. And so I think the message that I would give myself, would be to trust that I'm a lot more resourceful than I thought I was.
Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, it comes down to, it's going to be, obviously in that situation, it's going to be difficult to leave, but it's also going to be difficult to stay. So I guess you just have to choose your difficult and kind of really figure what is going to be the best for you in the long run.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely part of the issue in deciding to leave. One of the things that was presented to me was that it's a process. It's not a single event. It's a process. Leaving is a process. And so, the question like, well, why don't you just leave, or, just leave the person? It's just not that simple. There's so much more layers to it than that. So I think anybody listening that isn't in that situation but wants to support somebody who is, it's really just understanding that it's a process and determining where you're able to help on that process. So whether, you are a safe place for one night or a couple of nights, or, you're somewhere where maybe the person doesn't stay with you, but they can, stash money at your house or something like that. So when they do leave, they can come and pick up money or funds. So it's really just kind of trying to figure out how you can support somebody on that process.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Sarah-Marie, for sharing your time with us today. That was some really helpful and encouraging, encouraging to see where you were and where you are now, and hopeful, I think, to a lot of people out there as well.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me and for giving me the chance to talk about this, because it's important. And I think there's more and more survivors now that are kind of getting out there in the forefront and becoming more advocates now and really wanting to make a change in the situation.
Thanks for listening to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. For more ways to listen, connect with us on social media. To be a guest or to partner with us, check out our link tree at Disrupt the Everyday. Join us next time for more ways to disrupt the everyday.